You think I'm going to ask you about error theories, but not at all. I'm going to ask you about something much more interesting, which is zombies. What are zombies and where could I find them?
It's an idea that David Chalmers uses to try to explain the emergence of consciousness. If there were, zombies is a technical term in philosophy for creatures that are, identical to human beings in every way, except they're not conscious. Now, is that possible? Is it possible to be identical to as a human being but not be conscious? And if it's not possible, does that mean that consciousness is supervenient upon the kind of being that we are? Chalmers makes a distinction between logical supervenience and natural supervenience. And he says that he makes a distinction between natural supervenience and logical supervenience. And because there is a distinction,
So it's a logical possibility, but a natural impossibility?
yeah, so it's logically possible for human beings not to be conscious, but it's not naturally possible.
What about sleep?
Well, I think we have to add to have the potential of consciousness. We have to qualify it in that way. Yeah, so if you want to surprise me, then you can. But the problem is that, his argument is very complicated. He's a natural dualist. He argues that the consciousness is a different kind of thing to physicality. And it is a different kind of thing because it's not naturally possible for human beings not to be conscious, but it's logically possible for human beings not to be conscious. But where does that leave him? I don't know. It is a very complicated argument.
So then people without consciousness, right? Seems like there might be a way to regress back to that state. And I'd like to start with a quote again. The tendency of reflective consciousness to neglect the fact of its own existence and to understand itself vicariously through external objects is thereby explicable as a form of regression to its underlying patterns of awareness and interaction.
Yeah, so this is one explanation of error theory of why there is this ambivalence and uncertainty about consciousness in the modern world and also in the ancient world. Many people, many thinkers have pointed to this possibility of self-neglect. Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, these people. So if we've laid out a development, a evolution of a consciousness, but consciousness is perhaps rather fragile because we've noted all these different factors that can influence it, other people, neural states, sleeping. So it's fragile, and what happens to it when it is threatened? What happens to it when it is disturbed? There's a possibility of regression when these factors change under unfavourable, conditions, or even laziness. It's possible, to regress. And it's a very natural thing for it to do. Regression is a very natural event.
So the laziness is a regression, actually.
Well, I think that laziness can be a cause of the regression. Because if it takes some act of will to be conscious, you say, I think I just won't bother. I mean, this is a possibility. I mean, in the short term, yes, and in the long term, you might say, oh, I won't bother to develop myself. I won't read any books. I won't learn anything. I'll just sit in this chair.
And watch Netflix.
I think the long-term effects of that is going to be a regression.
That's how we get to zombies.
So I won't meet anybody. The conception of oneself will become vaguer, become more hidden. Yeah, I mean, to make it clearer, make this idea clearer, I think, you look at ourselves in comparison with animals. A severe regression will be becoming animal-like. It really happens. It happens with people on both ends of the spectrum of life. When you are a fetus, you haven't got reflective consciousness. You come into the world, your consciousness develops until you become, all greater, a conception of yourself. And then at the end of life, unfortunately, a lot of people become senile. When you watch a senile person go, it's like they're losing their mind. It's really going. They don't know who you are. They don't know who they are. And it seems that the faculty of reflective consciousness in senile people, in advanced cases, is very dim. It's very low. So there is this a regression in more refined cases, in more subtle cases, in less extreme cases. I think this can help us to explain how consciousness is a difficult experience to conceptualize. Both it's difficult to have this experience, and because it's difficult to have this experience, it's difficult to understand it. So regression would be one of the ways that I would explain the error theory that we have a lack of understanding of a consciousness in the modern world. And then another way that I would explain it, another aspect, because we're explaining an error theory through the structures of consciousness itself. One structure of consciousness is the graduation. The graduation of consciousness that doesn't either exist or not exist, like a logical truth, but it exists in degrees to a greater or lesser extent. I think there's another reason why consciousness finds itself very mysterious and difficult to get to grasp with itself, is that when consciousness understands itself, it understands itself in a different way to understanding other objects in the world. When you understand an object, any object in the world, you understand it as a contrast to other objects. Any perception at all is fundamentally a contrast between one thing and another, a black spot and a white board. And then anything that we understand in the world, we understand this tin because we compare it with other tins, objects that are not tins. And we have a contrast. But some objects, we don't have such a contrast to. Objects like God, difficult to find a contrast. Oh yeah, there are gods, God, but if you believe in one God, what do you compare it to? So God is, I think, essentially mysterious, because of that. Or the universe, or anything that lacks a background of understanding, there's a difficulty in grasping. It is mysterious. Flying saucers, something that anything that lacks a background of understanding, you have this problem of understanding. But I think this background is much more acute and special when we're understanding ourselves. Because when we're trying to understand ourselves, we say, I perceive what I am. We can only perceive ourselves as what we are, as ourselves. We can't understand, we can't relate this kind of understanding to another person who is understanding themselves. We understand ourselves, we perceive ourselves in a way that we can't perceive other people. So this makes this problem of needing a contrast to other objects of the same kind even more acute. So this is a basic problem of understanding the self. And this is, I think, is another reason that explains why our consciousness is difficult to get to grips with, why we overlook it, why people tend to overlook it, because it is, we got this fundamental problem of not being able to contrast our or compare our self-awareness with the awareness of other objects of the same kind. That is, awareness. I mean, your awareness is uniquely your own. I haven't got access to it. My consciousness is uniquely my own. And only I have awareness of it. There's no way that I can compare. Well, there are ways, but not explicitly, not in that intimacy that I have with my consciousness. I can't have an intimacy of consciousness with yours.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my mind doesn't even exist.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, I think for these reasons, and this explains, I think, not only why consciousness isn't immediately grasped, why this problem, but it explains the mysteriousness of consciousness, and it explains the idea of, it explains the experience of mysteriousness, why God is mysterious. Because you have this same perceptual pattern of lack of contrast. The lack of contrast is there with objects that we don't know very much about. And it is there with the consciousness because we can't contrast our own consciousness. Mm-hmm. So this is, I think, what the experience of mysteriousness is.
So error theory is the theory that the mind has a tendency of regressing our consciousness.
Well, I mean, I think that's one aspect of error theory. I mean, I see it as the tendency to overlook itself, the tendency to neglect itself. But not only to neglect itself, because I mean, I think it follows that if the mind is overlooking itself, it's going to tend to overlook its mental states. And I'm particularly concerned with value. So this is also an explanation of why values are overlooked, why values are misunderstood, why people think that there are intrinsic values in the world. So, I mean, if you have an obscure notion of mind, then you're going to, and mental states are an aspect of mind, I think it follows that you're going to tend to have an obscure notion of those mental states.
Yes. Let's move on to one of the final structure of mind we didn't talk about yet, and that is divisibility. So let's start with the example a couple of days ago, talking about Brian Johnson sitting down with himself and some of the Brians. He decides with them that they should fire Evening Brian because that's the one who's going for the cookies, and we can't have that. So that is a very creative application of the divisibility of mind, but let's try to explain it in a better way. A good starting point could be the temporal divisibility.
No, I'd rather much start with the divisibility of mind in the idea that we're not divisible. The idea that we're all part of a cosmic consciousness, that your mind is my mind and we're all one. Okay. Now, this is, implausible, but nevertheless, we can say, but we are not. We are separate. So that is, I think, the most fundamental aspect of the divisibility of mind, that we are different minds. The most physical way of thinking about the divisibility of mind apart from different people, is the idea that we have two hemispheres at least. And in some cases, these are the corpus callosum is cut. And it seems as if there were two many theorists but say that it seems as if there were two people or two consciousnesses within the same brain, which, because you have examples of a person's wanting to do something with one hand and not wanting to do it with the other, and they're struggling with each other. On one hand, one part of the brain is seeing something and the other part of the brain is prevented from describing or writing what the object is. So we have, this second form of the divisibility of mind, actual splits in the brain. And then we have, less severe splits perhaps in schizophrenia, where there are different aspects of the competing parts of the mind that are disturbing each other. I think that the bit that interests me most of all is that comes back to this notion of perception, that there is, that every perception that we have, there's a contrast. In miniature, it is the beginning of the divisibility of mind. The divisibility of our perception of the world is the beginning of the divisibility of mind. I mean, because the fragmentation of our perception of the world is the most subtle expression of the fragmentation of our mind.
Okay, that makes sense. But what is the fragmentation of our perception?
I mean, Immanuel Kant thought that we can only have perceptions if we are perceiving whole things. I think that we can only have perceptions if we can have perceptions of things in contrast to other things. I mean, we have a perception, we have a contrast between this thing and that thing, and then we have, there are many aspects of that thing, that there are fragmentations of perception within that thing, and then you have that thing that you're perceiving, and then in order to perceive that thing again, you need a background context in which to perceive that thing, and that object is contrasted again to that background. And then every item within your perception requires that same kind of contrast and fragmentation. So, I mean, I think there is a fundamental fragmentation, a requirement for fragmentation in our perception of the world. Somebody else has a modular. I mean, then we're going from aspects of the world. And then other people have, Daniel Dennett, for example, has a notion of mind as fragmentation. Mind is somehow layered upon itself. And there's somebody else who I can't think has a modular notion of mind, that we usually think of mind, or we used to, as one unit, split in at least two hemispheres. To what extent does this fragmentation exist? And some people have a modular notion of mind, where we don't have a unified mind, but we have all different aspects of our mind relating to each other and competing with each other. Again, we're getting towards, we're on again a spectrum. To how broad are the modules? The finest end of the spectrum, we have contrast in perception. And then we have contrast in perception, and then we have ideas that are units of perception. We have units of perception, but still we have contrast within the units of perception. And then the units of perception, after that, we have, modules, which are aspects of mind. So this is a notion, a different kind of understanding to the notion of the unity of mind that classical thinkers held, that mind is one. But it seems to me that at every level, mind is divisible. And I've tried to, not very well, but I've tried to outline across a spectrum, from our distinction between people, you and me, to perceptions of objects, how that divisibility runs through the whole of mind, through the whole spectrum of mind.
In the middle, I just gifted you a book from Nguyen, Games Agency as an Art. In that, I think you're really gonna like it, because he's talking about first competitive and striving players. What is a game is a goal and some constraints, your means. So he's analyzing games and everything, but his solution for the problems of games is going to be layered agencies. We are here, we have an agency of talking, I don't know, we are talking agency, but we might end up playing a game in this table, and then we actually start to focus on a different goal. We dive into the game and competing with each other, and we put on a different agency for the sake of the game. But when the game finishes, we are back and we're talking again. In fact, when we finish talking, then we are in a completely different agency. So here are these layered agencies. You can actually fit into this theory of divisibility of mind very well. So there is also temporal separation. It sounds simple, right? There is a you 10 minutes ago, a you a year ago, and in the future. So it's something simple. Nothing more wisdom to be gained here.
I mean, what we could talk about is, we're talking about these different structures of consciousness or mind that can be problematic. And then we could put all these structures together to give us insubstantiality.
Oh yeah, yes. In that case, let's move on to the final structure, insubstantiality. You just mentioned, because I wanted to bring it up before, and you said that we should wait until we go through graduation and divisibility,
yes.
And now we did. So what's up with insubstantiality?
So it seems to me that if we have all these tendencies, that can be either advantageous or problematic. This adds up to a consciousness that has a certain insubstantiality. It can be threatened, it can be reduced, even negated. So how do we maintain it? So if there can be fundamental division or graduation or regression or spaced out, these are numerous problems as well as possibilities for consciousness that I think add up to what we could call insubstantiality, that we're not. And we are, to explain this, I'd like to bring in Sartre's notions of how he sees consciousness, that he sees consciousness, well, he calls it being for itself, and he contrasts it with being in itself. But for simplicity, we just describe these things as consciousness and the physicality. He describes physicality as just being there. It is, impregnable. You cannot, destroy it. I mean, Sartre sees this in terms of a challenge to consciousness, because consciousness is here, and we can now call it has a certain insubstantiality. It can be threatened it can be undermined, it can be reduced, its focus, its center can be put out of kilter, its self-esteem can be undermined. So it has an insubstantiality. So Sartre sees our consciousness in contrast to the physicality. So for Sartre, he sees the physicality of the world having a certain advantage, a certain virtue, in that it is there. You cannot destroy it. Where consciousness isn't like that. It can be destroyed. What is consciousness trying to do? It's trying to, in Sartre's view, achieve the permanence, the impregnability of the physical world. But for Sartre, well, it is impossible. It cannot become the physical world, because if it became the physical world, if it took on the properties of the physical world, it would be no longer conscious at all. For Sartre, this means that consciousness, or mankind, is a useless passion. That's his phrase. It's trying to be something all the time that it cannot be. Yeah, I think that there is a certain attractiveness to a permanence, to impregnability, to solidity, to a concreteness. There's something attractive about that. But I don't know whether I agree with Sartre that we have to pursue our own substantiality in the same terms as the ontology of the physical world. So, well, I say, no, why do we I agree with Sartre that we are trying to pursue this kind of permanence, but there are different ways to pursue it. I say, look, it is impossible to pursue, as Sartre admits, but he doesn't give us the option of pursuing the permanence, a solidity, a substantiality of consciousness in other ways. I would think that we can pursue these things not in the terms of the ontology of materiality, of physicality, but we can pursue this in the ontology of value. Yeah, we do pursue these objectives, but in what way? So I think, well, look, this is a way that they could be pursued that's plausible in terms of value. So we can, I think, pursue a substantiality of value. Yeah, so that is my main thesis, my main point, that I think answers the fundamental human problem of what we are, that consciousness is of a certain kind of thing, it has a character, it is irresistibly, undeniably trying to do something, to be something, it wants to do something, and I think that it can do these things, but in the right way, in terms of value.
Let me quote two things about the nature of consciousness. That's pretty eye-opening. The stream of consciousness. Consciousness is thereby perpetually losing what it is in the previous instant and must remake itself according to the demands of the emerging and present moment. Next quote. The situation at every moment is different from the last, and the future is uncertain even to the extent that it may be taken away. Those are nice reflections of the fundamental nature of consciousness. But now, let's move on to some fine...
Of course, yeah, this idea is about explaining the creation, the production of value, how because we're moving through, we're not only in space where we have a diverse world, but also in time, moving through time and being confronted all the time with new choices and possibilities. And these new choices and possibilities are demanding that we produce new values to meet the challenges that we're facing. So this is another aspect of the production of value. And these values can't be any values. They have to be satisfactory to the requirements of the world.
The instant of decision is madness. I think that's a quote from you.
And
Or you quoted someone.
Kierkegaard. This is an aspect of existential choice. Existentialists, I mean, this is a key theme in existentialism. If you have a choice and you say, oh, I go into the market, I go into the shop and I'll buy an item and I have this item. The same item. It's $5 here, it's $10 here. Which one shall I choose? Well, you choose the $5 one. But this is not the kind of choice that existentialists are interested in, because it's not really a choice, already made by the presuppositions of values that you hold. You take. But the kind of choice that the existentialists are the kind of choices where there is not such a clear reason for making the choice. Then perhaps it's a impossible choice, like the case of the film and the reality of Sophie's choice, where the Nazis said to her, okay, you choose between your daughters. You must choose which one is going to die. If you don't choose, we will kill them both. How do you make that choice? You cannot make that choice. So this is the most extreme, perhaps, the most extreme example. There are many choices in life that you can't simply weigh up the factors on each side. What the existentialists want to do is you want to draw on your own resources to some extent. To look into yourself, to go to places that you haven't been before. It's more than just looking at the prices of things in the shops. It's looking into yourself and drawing on your own resources, perhaps creating values that you need to make that choice. This is the kind of choice that existentialists. And look, at this point, there are no real reasons, perhaps, to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that is why it is a moment of madness. Which way shall I go? I don't know. It is a moment of madness because there is no real choice. You just have to do the best you can.
Programmers, when talking with other programmers, we often encounter with choices those are extremely complex and impossible to reason about. But they try. They try. And very long conversations are the results.
Yeah.
And usually indecision follows.
But in principle, but that's not the whole story, because in principle there are no reasons sometimes, but there are no reason, so it's madness. There is no reason to make the choice.
Yeah.
But the further story of the existentialist is that, but you must make the choice. And once you've made the choice, it is your choice. You take responsibility for your choice because you've made it. You claim it. You make it your own and say, it's my choice now. I'm going to live by that choice. I'm not going to say, oh, well, I didn't really know what I was choosing. No, it's your choice and you should live by it. This is a theme of responsibility in existentialism.
See, Nietzsche said, sometimes you need a will to stupidity to stick with your decision, no matter what arguments come up against it. But we are nicely transitioning from choice to will. But let's put them together. Free will, free choice. You have something to say about that. What's your position on the free will, free choice debate?
I think it's another one of those questions that need to be reworded. And I don't think free will is a very good concept, if not a very good idea. Because I think when you're thinking about free will, people are looking for a reason that one has chosen something, but without that is nevertheless doesn't determine what you're doing. So it's a contradiction that people are often looking for, a kind of like an uncaused cause. They're looking for a reason to do something, but if you find a reason, it will negate the idea of freedom as they have it. Myself, I replace the idea of free will with self-will. that is acting in accordance with what you are. Now, what we are, we could begin to make an argument for some kind of self-will by saying, well, there are factors that lead to one's choices. If we think about, well, what are the factors that lead animals to the choices? What are the factors that lead human beings to the choices? I mean, we have factors that we apply that are products of our reflective, consciousness. And I think they're terribly important. The kind of things that we bring to bear on our choices are different from the kind of things that animals can bring to bear. It must be a mistake to simply say, we have no free will, or even we have free will. It's not an either-or question. There are variable factors here. So we say, I have certain reasons for acting that are produced by my consciousness. And then, we could still say, well, yeah, but then because they are reasons for behavior, they're just products of your background, of your genetics, etc. Aren't you still determined? Yeah, but I mean, again, these factors that guide our choices aren't all the same. I mean, we are constrained in different ways. We might be constrained by being chained down. We can't do what we want. Or we might be chained in a psychological way. There's things that are psychologically impossible for us to do. And in the discovery of these different aspects of ourselves, we say, well, the reasons that I did these things are more central to the person that I am. You can say, well, I was forced to do something by this other person. He had a gun, he forced me to do it. Okay. I was forced to do things because I have a psychological need to do them. We're getting towards more different kinds of constraints, different kinds of reasons for doing things. It seems to me that there are a whole spectrum of different kinds of reasons for doing things until we find the kinds of reasons for doing things are indistinguishable from what we are. In the end, you say, well, I acted according to something within me, but that is what I am. And, whether you call that free will or not, I mean, that's why I would call it self-will, because we are acting more closer and closer to what we really are. You can follow the things that make you act down a chain until those kinds of things become so refined that they become indistinguishable from what you think of as yourself. If you find yourself at that level, then it is you who are acting. And in that sense, I think you have self-will.
So let's continue to warm up to the concept of will, but still not go into that. But let's talk about, we have already talked about truth, right? And we established that it doesn't exist except as a regulative principle, which we might call the will to truth. We can move on to will itself. Then let me depict or outline the whole picture, how I understand it so far. So there is the mind, many things, but there is also a part of the mind that we call consciousness. And consciousness consists of 4 different constituents. We talked a lot about cognition, we talked a lot about affect, we talked some about, in the beginning a lot about value, and then there is will. So what is will?
I mean, I think it's a combination of these things. I mean, it is a impetus towards something. Yeah, I mean, one can like something. You say, I really like this. I really value this, let's say. Really value this. But one may not be motivated to do anything about it. The will is the motivation to do something about it. it cannot be purely a cognitive component, because, if you simply say, oh yes, it is there, and then it can't simply be a purely affective, say, oh yes, it's nice. Or it can't be a purely value component. Say, well, I want it. You've got to have something else in order to be motivated to do it. And the will is, action is I think, embodied will. I think the best way to understand action is as a expression of will. I was looking at Sartre's Constitution of the Ego, and he gives us some affect and value, but he doesn't give us will. And why doesn't? But strangely, he talks about action. Now, I find this very strange. He's talking about the constitution of the ego, but he talks about affect and value in different terms, but he doesn't talk about will. He talks about action. Now, to me, this is an indication that action is the embodiment of the will. To clarify this, we can then talk. I think you want to talk about the will to power, and I think that talking about the will as an embodiment of action, and then the will to power. You could think of the will to power as not simply this abstract force, but something that, when you have power over things, you want to have power over the environment, power as control. Okay, you can't have power as control over the world. You might want to, but you can't have it. You can have power over your car, perhaps when you're driving along, or you can have power over your body. The will to power is as the control over your body, over your limbs. That's an interesting, expression of the will to power. The will to power as control, and it's something very fundamental. I mean, Nietzsche, very strangely, he talks about the will to power not just in human being, but he talks about it. I think he goes off the rails here. He goes off the edge because he talks about it as something almost in the universe. But he certainly speaks about it as in all life, even in protoplasm. In protoplasm, he's going too far here. But I think he wants to make a point that the will to power is something that is enacted in life. In order to have life, in order to be in the world, you need to have control over the world to some extent. You need to have at least control over what you're doing. You need to have control over your limbs and your actions. So the will to power, in this sense, as control over the world as you're expressing it in yourself, is very fundamental. I think that the will to power, in this sense, as embodiment in action, I think helps us to explain what the will is.
What's wrong with it?
I think what's wrong with the will to power is that if you start making it a principle of life, okay, you can use it as a explanatory aspect of behavior, but as an objective, it's not adequate. Heidegger, for example, had strong criticisms of the will to power as a way of life, as a way to behave. Heidegger thought that the will to power was destructive, but Heidegger had a particular view of life, a particular view of truth. He thought that truth isn't something you can grasp with the will to power, but truth is something that needs to reveal itself, that you allow it to come into your view. So this is why Heidegger was opposed to the will to power. To me, the will to power isn't an adequate as a human objective because it doesn't give the satisfactions that one is looking for in life. One can understand how it is satisfying to have power, to have control, to will. But is it ultimately satisfying? Perhaps, if that's only as far as one can see. So I have the will for power, I have control, I have power, but is it satisfying in itself? Even if one has satisfactions in finding the will to power, in expressing the will to power, but why do you find a satisfaction in the will to power? The will to power seems to call out for a further satisfaction, both in the idea that you need something further to explain it, and in the idea that you need something further objective. So the will to power doesn't seem to be a satisfactory, objective in life, because you have power but not be satisfied. And then you can also say, well, power being motivated by the will to power, but then say, well, is it really power that motivates me? There seems to be something else that is driving me to pursue power. I would say, of course, that what's driving us to pursue power is a more fundamental drive I would describe as value.
The Mazzonian satisfying principle of life, will to value.
Yes, so that's how I would, quite frankly, I don't really know why Nietzsche why he goes for the will to power rather than the will to value. Why doesn't he say, my principle is the will to value? I mean, I really don't know, because he is quintessentially a philosopher of value. But nevertheless, some people have said, well, there's psychological reasons he has to choose power, because he has to compensate for psychological weakness. So he's compelled to choose power. There are theorists, there are philosophers who actually say, well, we can find the will for value in Nietzsche. I can't. He never talks about the will to value. He talks about the will to will, yes, which is very close to the will to value, but he doesn't talk about the will to value. Why doesn't he go the whole way to the will to value? I mean, I just don't know.
Maybe he wanted to leave you the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, maybe. He said, we'll leave it to the philosophers of the future to find the rank and order of value. They were pointing forward. He didn't claim to have the answer, if we can say that. He thought that people in the future would have a better answer that he was pointing to.
In some sense, you're not working out the rank order of value, but your work could be summarized with this call to action that Nietzsche just had for the future philosophers. It's just your call to action is 600 pages of a book. Let me close it with the quote. The will to value is a direct form of self-affirmation as self-value, as well as an indirect affirmation of other beings. So, folks, that's it for you, Derek Mazzone, philosopher and sailor in pursuit of value. Where can people find out more about you and these topics?
Well, for people who want greater depth in their thinking than we've covered here, you can come to my workshops, my philosophy of value workshops on meetup.com.
They can also read your book?
Yes, you can read my book, The Pursuit of Value.
It's a nice
one. This is one of my books, of course. But this is my main work.
Or watch your YouTube lectures.
Yes, of course, yeah. I have a series of YouTube on the Philosophy of Value channel. I've got about 70 videos there that cover different aspects of value and consciousness.
Well then, it was a pleasure Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The pleasure was mine. Thank you.